Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad that you're here. My name is Paul Poiker. I'm the archivist here at the Moravian Archives, and we would like to welcome you here in our reading room, and also everyone who is following this online, to our program today. It's my honor to introduce to you Dr. Jared Burkholder. He is currently a scholar in residence at the Moravian Theological Seminary, and Jared holds a bachelor's degree from Columbia International University, a master's from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, and a PhD of the University of Iowa. Jared Burkholder has published several edited volumes. The latest is Brethren Intersections, History, Identity, and Cross Currents, that came out in 2020. And another research field is Moravians, and especially the Moravians and their intersection with the evangelical movement. Jared is a member of the editorial board of the Journal of Moravian History, and I've known Jared for 20 years as a researcher here in our reading room. Jared took the German script course in 2005. He won several awards, such as the Alva McLean Award for Faculty Excellence, and it has been a special pleasure to have had Jared here in Bethlehem for the past 3 months, and I'm grateful to the seminary and the Institute for Moravian History and World Heritage for having Jared here as a scholar in residence. Today, the topic is When Billy Sunday Comes to Town, Moravian Reactions to America's Most Sensationalist Evangelist. Jared.
Well, thank you, Paul, and I want to thank the Institute and also the School of Theology here for allowing me to be here this semester, and also wanted to thank Grace College as well for giving me a sabbatical semester. And Paul and Tom have helped out with some research for this talk, so I appreciate that. And also back in Indiana, Charisse Wise and Miriam Leatham they've both helped with some images as well. So I appreciate all of the folks who have helped out with this, and also for you all coming today to listen. In 1739 and 1740, George Whitefield, the most famous evangelist of the time, toured through Philadelphia speaking to crowds of 15 to 20,000 people. Hoping to leverage Whitefield's preaching into a sustained movement, his supporters constructed an auditorium that could be called the city's first evangelistic tabernacle. It probably held around 5,000 people, and for a time was the largest structure in the city. Moravians were among the trustees of Whitefield's tabernacle, at least until it became a Calvinist-only event space. Almost 200 years later, in 1915, Billy Sunday, who also preached to crowds of 15 to 20,000 people, descended on Philadelphia, and his supporters constructed a tabernacle. Just as with Whitefield, Philadelphia Moravians lent their support. At the time of Sunday's largest campaigns, Moravians were fully embracing the ecumenical spirit of the age. They were involved in organizations such as the Federal Council of Churches and favored cooperation in mission, just the kind of cooperation Sunday's evangelistic campaigns depended on. Moravians were also involved in the evangelical culture of the time. They participated in organizations such as the YMCA and supported progressive era organizations such as the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Sunday's campaigns were squarely part of this ecumenical mix of urban religious reform and evangelical activism, and so it is perhaps not surprising, as we'll see today, that many Moravians supported the campaigns, despite Sunday's controversial reputation. I'll start out today introducing Sunday. I'll talk about Moravian involvement and perspectives before, during, and after two of Sunday's large campaigns that directly touched the Moravians: the Philadelphia campaign in 1915 and the Winston-Salem campaign in 1925. And I should mention as well that the college where I teach is in Winona Lake, Indiana, and that happens to be where Billy Sunday and his family moved in 1911 and built a house there. And that house is now a historic building on our campus, and I teach in the history department, and so we're kind of involved in the preservation of that. So this is an interesting talk that brings together two of my experiences and interests. So Billy Sunday was born on November 19th, 1862 in Ames, Iowa, into a poor family on the American frontier. His father, a Union soldier, died of disease shortly after enlisting, leaving his mother to raise several children. Unable to support them, she sent Billy and his older brother to an orphanage where he spent much of his youth. Despite limited education, Sunday showed athletic talent and eventually became a professional baseball player in the 1880s, playing for teams such as the Chicago White Stockings. His time in baseball brought him public recognition and exposure to city life, but it was during this period that he experienced a dramatic religious conversion through the influence of the Pacific Guarded Mission in Chicago, an event that would steer him away from sports and toward a career as one of America's most famous evangelists. He left baseball and joined the staff of the YMCA and started preaching in the late 1880s. His earliest speaking opportunities were informal, giving personal testimonies at YMCA meetings and small evangelistic gatherings around Chicago. His first significant preaching experience came while working as an assistant to the well-known evangelist J. Wilbur Chapman in the 1890s. Under Chapman's mentorship, Sunday learned to organize meetings, lead songs, and eventually deliver short sermons. When Chapman left to pursue other ministry, Sunday began conducting his own campaigns under tents on what became known as the Kerosene Circuit. His first independent revival meetings took place in small Midwestern towns in states like Iowa and South Dakota. These early meetings were modest in size but marked the beginning of Sunday's dynamic preaching career. Local churches had a close-up view of the operations of the inner workings of the campaigns, and there were a lot of inner workings. Although Sunday had started with small tent meetings, by the 1910s his campaigns were organizational behemoths run with all the trappings of industrial efficiency. He had a staff of 20 to 30 people, and months before a campaign, local administrative staff would be secured, an advance team would network with as many local churches as would cooperate, usually all but Unitarians and Roman Catholics. Local ministers and business leaders would comprise a central administrative team, and thousands of volunteers from throughout the city would be secured through church networks, all organized into various committees tasked with individual parts of the enterprise. Some of these committees would organize preparation, prayer meetings, and Bible studies, and would bring in converts from earlier campaigns to give their testimonies at these gatherings or in local churches. These preparation committees would be organized by geographic districts across the city. Another committee would work on the location and construction of the tabernacle. Tabernacles were cavernous icons constructed quickly, sometimes in just a couple of weeks, with donated materials. But they were not haphazard. They were constructed as event venues. There were booths where one could buy Billy Sunday merchandise, not t-shirts and posters, but sermons and hymn books. There was often an infirmary with several sick beds, a post office, a small cafeteria, and staff rooms. All of this surrounded the main arena with enough wooden benches to seat upwards of 15,000 people. A platform, sometimes 6 feet high, was also there, and a massive choir section behind the pulpit, large enough to seat choirs of well over 1,000 singers. And of course, on the floor were several inches of sawdust that served to dampen the crowd noise. Once the campaigns began, committees would take care of other logistics. Although Sunday's meetings were the main event, there were daily side meetings. Members of Sunday's entourage would hold luncheons and smaller meetings at local businesses or gather together factory workers, both men and women. They might visit local hospitals or hold meetings of the local YMCA. Committees would secure transportation, prepare food, and put together the arrangements. The large meetings where Billy Sunday preached were fine-tuned to build maximum effect. In the revival tradition, every celebrity preacher has had a charismatic song leader. For Sunday, that was Homer Rodeheaver, a booming baritone who used his trombone to lead the crowd in familiar crusade songs. Rodeheaver's songs were upbeat, but not ruckus, more sentimental and reflective. Sunday, the celebrity at the center of it all, would wait in the wings until he felt the audience was sufficiently primed. Although he was no doubt sincere, he also knew the audience would be expecting his trademark antics, his constant movement, sliding across the stage, lots of arm waving, sometimes jumping from the platform or climbing on top of a chair or even the podium. Anecdotal sources indicate he might even have smashed a chair or two on occasion. And while this was all before amplification, so his sermons were essentially shouted. Sunday was kept in shape by a personal trainer who would give him massages between meetings. Another trademark was his so-called street language. He was not theologically trained and cared little about highbrow etiquette or the language of polite Victorian society. Capturing quotes that highlighted his street talk was a favorite practice of newspaper reporters. Campaigns were, in fact, significant media events. During and after the campaigns, city newspapers would print large spread coverage of the meetings and sometimes included special full transcripts of sermons. Of course, the climax of the service was the altar call. Those who came forward were said to hit the sawdust trail and were called trail hitters. They would make their way front and shake Billy's hand, then fill out a decision card with name and contact information. One of the blanks on the card was to indicate if there was a local church in which they wanted to indicate interest. Each local church had a mail slot in the tabernacle post office, and these cards would be sorted out and put in the different mailboxes so that local churches could follow up with these individuals. Thousands of these cards would circulate through the mail slots, fanning out to churches across the city, representing the souls of those who had been converted. So now let me look specifically at the Moravians and how they were involved. And I'll be bouncing back and forth between Philadelphia in 1915 and Winston-Salem in 1925. The Philadelphia campaign was one of Sunday's largest to date. First Moravian church in the city was among the 350 to 400 churches which were involved. Church leaders at First Moravian reported that arrangements for the Sunday campaign began in June, 6 months before the actual campaign, and the Sunday planning team rented offices in the city's stock exchange building. In his congregational diary, John Romig, minister of First Moravian, wrote that, quote, "The most prominent businessmen in our city are in charge of the material, but nevertheless important matters of the campaign." He also described a great committee of 70 with representatives from all the cooperating churches of Philadelphia. E.G. Hoyler represented Moravians on this general committee. Various smaller committees were formed across the city, and Philadelphia was divided into geographic districts. First Moravian was in District 6. Each district has had an executive committee, and Romig mentions this committee gathering in the Christian Alliance Chapel. Planners hope to enlist 50,000 men in the city's Sunday schools for spiritual preparation, Bible studies, and cottage prayer meetings. Prayer groups gathered in an estimated 5,000 homes. First Moravian member Gifford Epsenbach represented the Moravians for the 6th District prayer meetings. Planners also hope to make arrangement with the Philadelphia Rapid Transit Company to have a special fare for people going to the tabernacle. Also, in the months leading up to the Philadelphia campaign, 1,000 converts from Sunday's recent Scranton campaign descended on the city, holding special testimony meetings in churches and in Wanamaker's department store. First Moravian asked for a group of these converts to visit the congregation, which they did on Sunday, October 25th, 1914. In the morning service, Romig preached on the Moravian view of evangelism, and in the evening, the trail hitters from Scranton spoke, giving testimonies of their conversion and encouraging the congregation to stay involved in the campaign preparations. Romig commented in the church diary, quote, "They were not polished men as speakers, but each had a story to tell." Regarding the coming campaign, Hoyler admonished his fellow Moravians, quote, "Believe in it. Be an enthusiastic booster and not a knocker. Get into the habit of inviting people to come to church. You will find this will be comparatively easy, for there will be such a religious atmosphere in the city as we have never experienced, and men and women everywhere will expect, yes, long, to have church people talk to them about the gospel. Everywhere men will talk about these great meetings, and you may at times even forget your errand at the store or office because someone will want to talk to you about these things that are transpiring in Philadelphia. Let our church with her 172 years of history, get into the vortex of this vast movement." And what results could Moravians expect? Hoyler explains, "Judging from the effects of Mr. Sunday's campaigns in other cities, his coming here will be tremendously worthwhile from both an economic as well as a religious viewpoint. In Scranton, 200 of the 1,100 saloons have already been forced to close their doors because of the lack of business, and about 400 more are having an awful struggle to keep going. In Pittsburgh, some of the most prominent women's clubs, instead of devoting their time to the consideration of Shakespeare and other good topics of a similar nature, they have decided that they could well afford to spend at least a part of their meetings in studying the Bible." The Winston-Salem campaign was 10 years after Philadelphia. In 1925, the mayor and representatives of the Winston-Salem Ministerial Association first approached Sunday at his Greensboro, North Carolina campaign in 1919, inquiring about a campaign in Winston-Salem. Sunday agreed, and 6 years later conducted a 6-month campaign. Moravians played an important role. Unlike in Philadelphia, where Moravians were one small church among hundreds of others in a major city, in Winston-Salem, multiple Moravian congregations were involved, and the minister of home church, J. Kenneth Fole, appears to have been the local chairperson of the entire Winston-Salem campaign. By this time, Sunday was in his 60s, and his celebrity power was waning. He no longer did major cities, and his venues were slowly decreasing in size. But we can still assume Fole worked to organize the same kind of preparation events and logistical arrangements that accompanied all of Sunday's campaigns. No longer insisting that cities construct a large tabernacle for the campaign specifically, Winston-Salem outfitted a well-known local tobacco warehouse for the event, known as the Piedmont Warehouse or the Norfleet Warehouse. A souvenir photo book boasted that, quote, "Piedmont's half-century of success has never been so great as when Piedmont Warehouse was converted into Piedmont Tabernacle." So let me talk a bit about what happens during these two campaigns with Moravians involved. Various Moravians traveled to attend both the Philadelphia and Winston-Salem meetings. A young Douglas L. Wrights, then a student at Moravian Seminary, wrote about Sunday in the Comenius. He says, "Probably a score of our students have heard the Evangelist. They have struggled with the crowds to gain admission to the tabernacle. They have breathed the sawdust-laden air of the vast enclosure. They have endured the penalty of sitting for hours on hard wooden benches. Members of First Moravian worked to serve lunch at special meetings for female factory workers. Later in the campaign, Romeg reported on a special minister's reception at the YMCA, where the whole Sunday entourage, quote, lined up for handshaking. Given his key role in the South, Full had even more opportunity to mingle with Sunday and his team. At the start of the Winston-Salem campaign, Full wrote about the, quote, large delegation of ministers, the mayor of the city, and leaders of the various civic clubs and other citizens who greeted the Sunday's entourage upon their arrival at the train station. Later that evening, Full entertained Billy and Helen Sunday, Billy's wife, for dinner at the parsonage. Smaller special meetings were also conducted at local Moravian churches and on one occasion at the Fries residence. The Winston-Salem campaign was centrally located around more Moravian congregations than in Philadelphia. Home Moravian Church, Emmanuel Moravian Church, Calvary Moravian Church, Christ Moravian Church, and Fairfield Moravian Church all reported on the campaign, and their members mentioned attending the services. Along with Full's involvement, Bishop Rontaler represented the Moravians on the platform, occasionally introducing Sunday or offering the prayer at the campaign meetings. In Winston-Salem, a number of Moravian churches suspended their evening or midweek services, in part to encourage participation in the campaign meetings, but probably also in recognition that they would not be able to compete with them. Attendance was down for those services that did remain on schedule. Although this did not seem to bother most Moravian ministers around Winston-Salem, at least one minister did complain, writing in the church diary, quote, "The Billy Sunday campaign has demoralized us. Only 3 men were present for Sunday school, and the others presumably attended the afternoon's men's meeting at the tabernacle." Moravian ministers in the South followed up with their members who had duties at the campaign. The minister at Fairview Moravian Church reported, quote, "The list of ushers and secretaries were called and checked over to see if all would work at the Sunday meetings." Ministers kept up with prayer meetings meant to support the campaign and also looked after converts. The minister at Calvary Moravian Church noted that during the final week of the Winston-Salem campaign, he made many calls among the new converts. At both the Philadelphia and Winston-Salem campaign, Moravians heard typical Billy Sunday sermons, primarily evangelistic, but on occasion, his sermons could veer into social topics. There was a strong gendered component to the campaign. In some ways, the campaigns reinforced gender expectations. As we would expect, female volunteers prepared meals for midweek luncheons and worked as secretaries for the various committees. Romeg noted that January 29th was Moravian Day for the Tabernacle's nursery service, and Moravian women were among those who took care of, quote, 27 babies, all duly labeled and checked. And Sunday's campaigns included gender-specific meetings in addition to those open to everyone. The messaging in these meetings reflected the era. Men's meetings often focused on sexual purity and the consequences of vices. Go one more, There was plain talk on lust and sexual diseases, and of course the evils of alcohol. Men were admonished to be upright, hardworking, good husbands and leaders for their families. In the meetings for women, Sunday admonished women to have high moral standards in courtship, to avoid immoral men, strive for motherhood or other fitting professions, and be part of the moral fabric of their families and communities. But Sunday's campaigns also reflected the evolving role of women and the progressive era's impulse for social reform. The campaign organized luncheons, as I mentioned, for female factory workers. Sunday's executive team included a circle of women who exercised strong leadership. Virginia Asher, for example, was a regular on the platform, taking her place at the piano. And although Billy was the stage showman, it was Helen Sunday, his wife, who was essentially what some have called the CEO of the Sunday enterprise, handling much of the organization. And though the presence of Billy meant that the women's meetings were not quite exclusive to women, the meetings were meant to be female spaces in which older and younger women could mingle and engage with each other about topics relevant to them independent of their husbands, brothers, or male friends. Sunday sermons to women were known for their frankness about sexual purity. In Boston, nurses were preemptively brought in to help with those who were overcome by the explicit nature of the topics. One Moravian man who attended a men's-only meeting was amazed at Sunday's, quote, thorough knowledge of anatomy and hygiene, unquote. Historian Margaret Bendroth has noted that the women's-only meetings facilitated a, quote, theater of female moral power that both reinforced and subtly challenged the gender boundaries of the time. By addressing women directly, quote, she has written, quote, Sunday both affirmed their subordinate domestic role and paradoxically granted them a sense of corporate power. This fit the larger pattern of reform movements such as the Women's Christian Temperance Union and or within the settlement movement. Sunday's campaigns included many of the same women who were involved in other parts of progressive era reform. Sunday sometimes stepped into politics as well. He criticized educated elites and theologians, but pandered to business leaders and local heroes like police and firefighters. In addition to promoting prohibition, he was a nationalist, warned about the dangers of anti-American movements, and supported American entry into World War I. He used his position to sell war bonds and trafficked in anti-German tropes. He blasted unions and socialists, and as a result, he was a darling of capitalist barons and industrial leaders. During campaigns, local businesses would display their endorsements in the local papers. These stances not only secured him the endorsement of big business, but the KKK as well, whose members resonated with his Americanist politics and his populist railing against modernism and evolution. Northern campaigns, such as those in Philadelphia, were racially integrated. When the editor of the Moravian gave his impressions of the Philadelphia meetings, he noted his observations that those going forward for conversion included both white and African American trail hitters, something that seemed to him quite democratic. In the South, Sunday mostly stuck with racial convention and segregated his meetings. Full reported in the Diary for Home Church that Sunday's Winston-Salem campaign included 2 meetings for the city's segregated African American population. Timed to coincide with one of these African American only meetings, the Klan took out a half-page ad in the Winston-Salem Journal endorsing Sunday. Although Sunday never condemned the Klan, he made it clear he didn't have any connection to them, but he also didn't refuse their money. Both Sunday and Rodeheaver offered the kind of paternalistic sympathy for African Americans common to the era. Rodeheaver, who grew up in the South, would later explore the African roots of plantation music and attempted to honor the black musical tradition, but did so in problematic ways, including utilizing blackface. So let me talk more about Moravian reactions to Sunday. Sunday's campaigns prompted a spectrum of opinions in the general public. On the one end of the spectrum were wholehearted supporters, those who almost venerated him. And on the other end, there were those who saw something sinister and manipulative, that Sunday was a charlatan bent on getting rich and living the celebrity life. Between these opposite poles, there were a cluster of opinions which were mildly cynical. Often these consisted of caricatures of Sunday's physicality or anti-intellectual style. But even if they disliked Sunday's lowbrow persona or doubted his sincerity or the authenticity of the many conversions, many Christians were unwilling to completely condemn Sunday when his preaching seemed to be resulting in so many conversions and boosting church attendance, along with curbing moral vice. Within the Moravian Church at the time, there was a circle within the northern province who were enthusiastic about evangelism, winning souls, etc. They supported initiatives to promote conversion, get the church more involved in this, and tried to keep this topic on people's minds. This included Philadelphia's Romig, as I mentioned, but it also naturally included the new provincial evangelist, John Greenfield. In the southern province, ministers were accustomed to the practice of protracted meetings and revival services, which had been held since the 19th century, though these were subdued and rarely sensational. As the Philadelphia Bulletin put it, quote, "The Moravian Church believes with all its heart and soul in that experience of the new life which is popularly styled conversion, though its methods for securing that end have been quiet rather than sensational." Bishop Rontaler, as I mentioned, also supported these evangelical measures. But those Moravians who supported Sunday were aware that not everyone shared their enthusiasm. Prior to the campaign, the newsletter at First Moravian stated, quote, "Doubtless there will be difference of opinion as to the propriety of the methods of Mr. Sunday, but he certainly must be moved by the proper spirit, where he could never lead men in such remarkable numbers to salvation and a new life. Whether we like the methods or not, our hearts must be in the campaign, and it is not for us to stand by shirking the labor and leaving the honor of the results to others. We must not forget, when considering methods, that the Apostle Paul said, 'I am become all things to all men, that I may by all means save some.'" Once the Philadelphia campaign was underway, Douglas Wrights reported on the result of discussions among students taking place at Moravian Seminary about the campaigns. They admitted Sunday's methods were not suitable for the ministry of a settled minister, but given Sunday's unconventional calling, the students were willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Sunday's primary Moravian critic was J. Max Hark. Hark was a minister, but represented a more genteel and well-educated segment of the Moravian Church. He came from a well-to-do family, was a published essayist, and a member of several civic and cultural organizations. He also edited several religious newspapers, including for a time the Moravian, in which he had a regular column. Hark's highbrow sensibilities were on full display as he used his column to speculate about what he believed accounted for Sunday's ability to get people into the tabernacle and down the aisle. And I hope you'll indulge me in reading a lengthy quote from his comment because it's pretty rich. Hark says, "Billy Sunday is a man possessed of none of the advantages of a higher education, of culture or refinement, of wealth, political influence, or social standing, a very ordinary man, with the extraordinary power of throwing the whole city of Philadelphia into spasms of hysteria, attracting and holding immense audiences and moving them at his will, controlling them absolutely, body, soul, and spirit. The phenomenon is not accounted for by saying that they come out of curiosity to hear a professed preacher of the gospel exhaust the disgusting slang and vulgarity of the vile vocabulary of the slums, and to see an ambassador of God perform all the antics of a comedian and acrobat combined. That simply could not be the reason why the provost of the university and hundreds of bishops and ministers would be willing to sit there and applaud a coarseness of thought and language often little short of blasphemy. Analyze his sermons and what have you. About one half is nothing but vulgar invective and vituperation. 1/4 consists of jokes and stories and boasts and threats. What theology there is in them is mainly an obsolete medievalism, so crude and simple that it takes almost a simpleton to believe in it today. He carefully and systematically prepares the field of his operations to fix public expectancy on what he is going to do. That, whether he knows it or not, is the first step towards inducing hypnosis. In the collective subject, the community, the mind of the mob is fixed on some idea, receiving added strength from the union of many minds. A crowd will feel, act, and even crudely think as one person, the units of the crowd practically losing their individuality and self-control. It is the phenomenon we see in lynching, where the mob feels and does what no individual as such would ever do. It is what produced the witchcraft burnings of New England and numerous other historic follies. It is simply a form of hypnosis. Of course, there are also the usual additions of the music and all the accompaniments known to aid in bringing about a more or less passive condition of the reason and intellect so as to give freer play to the emotions. I cannot but think, too, that the incessant moving about of the evangelist on the stage, his athletic performances, conduce to this same end and are perhaps designed to do so. Like the passes of the hypnotist makes before his subject with his hands, they are a part of the hypnotizing treatment." End quote. For Sunday's defenders, the fact that the Moravian would carry an article from a prominent minister that dismissed Sunday's conversions as nothing more than hypnosis and mass hysteria required a response. After all, it became apparent to readers that Hark had not actually attended any of Sunday's campaign meetings. Soon after, Romig published his own opinion piece in the Moravian. Quote, "Sunday has his detractors, of course. His crude language of our streets, cigar stores, and saloons, his sensational activities on the platform, his theology all attract attack. But these things are an affront only when learned from the printed page. Those who enter the tabernacle to criticize are so impressed with the sincerity and earnestness of the man, his wide reading, humor, his vocabulary, and his skill, that they go away only to praise. Sunday's performances on the platform have been characterized as religious vaudeville. Well, if they are religious vaudeville, and may attract a vaudeville crowd and give it religion. Making bases on the platform, standing on the desk, diving off the high perch of the rostrum, keep his audiences awake while they drive home mightily truths of his teaching." Romig's was not the only backlash against Hark. One reader wrote in a letter to the editor of the Moravian, quote, "Surely such an article as that published recently should not pass unnoticed without a protest from everyone who believes in the old-time religion. It seems to me that the writer of these articles needs some of it, and I think all the members of our beloved church ought to get on their knees and ask God to open the eyes of this man so that he may not be a hindrance to his cause, but a help. God is blessing Sunday, even though he may say some things which shock us. We need the gentle tap of a sledgehammer sometimes. Why would we wonder that people crowd the tabernacle when since November the Christian people of Philadelphia have been gathering in little groups all over the city twice a week, praying and pleading with God for just such an outpouring of his Spirit? Why should we look to psychology and hypnotism to account for all of these signs? I hope that our Moravian ministers will raise their voices in protest against such articles being forced upon the readers of the Moravian. And protest they did. John Greenfield, the Northern Province provincial evangelist and author of a regular column in the Moravian himself, charged that the newspaper should have refused to print Hark's irreverent opinions about Sunday. In response, Hark accused Greenfield of supporting censorship and privileging his own pro-evangelism column at the expense of Hark's more intellectual column. Hark says, "Do people really want them to have the power to censor what is said in editorials in our church newspaper? Unfortunately, the intolerant spirit that would fill the paper and the air with its own opinions and deny the same privilege to all others is characteristic of too many professional evangelists. This intolerant, more holy-than-thou attitude is one of the many evil accompaniments of the popular evangelistic movements of the day, if not of all times. Why should the man who approves of the methods of Billy Sunday and his kind on that account be regarded, and regard himself, as a better and more earnest and devout Christian than the man who does not, and who frankly gives his reasons for it?" Other readers weighed in as well. One wrote, quote, "Please record me as voting in favor of the publication of Hark's column. I am not certain of my own attitudes towards Billy Sunday as yet, and do not know whether I shall end up agreeing with the writer or not. But of this I am convinced, that I cannot agree with anyone who considers this thought-provoking column unsuitable for publication in our church paper. That there are persons in the Moravian Church today who would actually censor the press savors too much of Pharisaism." Unquote. Now to my final section. Sunday's evangelistic campaigns always had an afterlife. For local ministers, the immediate concern was following up on the decision cards that were being funneled into their respective mail slots. Results were modest for First Moravian. Over the course of the campaign, they received only 27 cards. 2 were duplicates. Of the remaining 25, 4 were small children, 3 were faithful church members of First Moravian already who went forward for reconsecration. 2 were from other Moravian congregations. 2 were from former members who had, quote, grown indifferent. 5 were individuals already in First Moravian's confirmation class. 3 more were brought into the confirmation class, and the remaining 6 did not amount to fruitful connections. And Romick is recording all of this in the church diary. For Moravians in Winston-Salem, the campaigns were more impactful. In the days and weeks afterward, Bishop Ron Thaler reported that he in full, quote, baptized and confirmed about 40 persons, the result of the Billy Sunday meetings, unquote. Home Church reported, quote, reaping a veritable spiritual harvest during the past month, and thus far 62 souls have been received into the church. More than 80% of whom came by profession of faith, and never before have we seen so many men reached for the Lord in such a short time. The tabernacles also had an afterlife. In Philadelphia, the tabernacle was dismantled and the lumber sold or donated, being used in other building projects. Other parts were given out or sold as souvenirs. Since the Winston-Salem campaign meetings were held in the old tobacco warehouse, there was no tabernacle to be disassembled and parceled out. But there were still souvenirs that were given away or sold, such as the platform chairs. Billy Sunday autographed the chair that he sat on for the duration of the Winston-Salem campaign and evidently gave it to Reverend Fole. And this has been handed down through the Fole family and actually has ended up in Winona Lake at the archives there. Local supporters were also conscious about the transient and ephemeral nature of these kinds of crusades, such that they would be constructed and then literally disassembled, leaving barely a trace. Sunday, too, felt the fleeting nature of his campaign, his swooping in and then moving out. Near the end of the campaigns, he would begin to encourage audiences to try to sustain the spiritual momentum after he left. Neither did local supporters want to see the momentum lost. This concern was channeled into organizing clubs, Billy Sunday clubs for men and Virginia Asher clubs for women. The clubs were to promote lay evangelism, conversion, primarily through testimonies and an evangelistic message in the ways that were gender appropriate. Men in the Billy Sunday clubs would also lead follow-up evangelistic services or promote small revival meetings. These clubs were organized both in Philadelphia and in Winston-Salem. In Philadelphia, the Billy Sunday Club held open-air meetings on the empty site of the tabernacle after it had been torn down. Moravians in Philadelphia seem not to have been active in these clubs, but Winston-Salem Moravians certainly were. In the Winston-Salem area, there were 600 to 650 members of the citywide Billy Sunday Club, with smaller chapters in various denominations. Sometimes they met together as a large group, which they did at least once on the campus of Salem College. Other times, local chapters met at various churches or civic locations. Several months after the campaign, a report from Home Church mentioned, quote, "On the first Thursday evening, we had the privilege of entertaining the Billy Sunday Club for its weekly meeting. If there are those who question the character of the work accomplished during the recent great evangelistic campaign, it would be well for them to attend at least one of the weekly meetings of this club." Unquote. Reports about the activities of the Billy Sunday clubs continue in the Wachovia Moravian until 1935, a full decade after the Winston-Salem campaign. In closing, it is impossible to know what the majority of Moravians thought about Billy Sunday and the campaigns. Our sources provide only a small slice of those willing to voice opinions. To my knowledge, we don't have any perspectives from women within the church who attended Sunday's women-only meetings. From the perspectives we do have, Hark's highbrow skepticism surely represented a segment of the church. But given the level of involvement in the campaigns, especially in the southern province, where Reverend Full led the committee, as well as the defense of Sunday among northern Moravians, it would seem that there was a significant level of support, a level that reflected the Moravians' desire to work and support larger church efforts and a general evangelical orientation of the church at the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. That was a very interesting talk, and everything was very new to me, and a period in time that I don't know very much about. And it was interesting that you were able to compare Philadelphia and Winston-Salem. Are there any questions?
Are there still clubs going on, or when did they stop?
I don't know exactly when they stopped, but at some point they did. Yeah. I mean, my sense is that the last reference that I could find was in 1935. So my guess is they probably ceased a long time ago. Although there are still lots of people who venerate Billy Sunday within, the evangelical contexts. We have folks showing up that want tours of the home, and it's clear that this is sacred space to them. So.
Can you tell us a little bit about that home? Is that
Sure.
Is that a museum? Does it have regular hours? What can you see there?
Yeah, so it is interesting. We have a small local history museum on campus, and then the historic home is kind of connected to that. And so Billy Sunday died in the in the late 1930s. And Helen Sunday, his wife, lived into the 1950s. So she lived a significant portion of her life alone in the house. Interestingly, she actually became an evangelist in her own right, did some traveling around, never as well known as her husband. And both she and Homer Rodeheaver met Billy Graham. So, folks who do this history of revivalism, that's a interesting connection point for them. And so people started showing up at the Sunday home while Helen Sunday was still living there and wanted her to show them around the Evangelist's house. And so she was, in a sense, the first curator of the Sunday home as a public, kind of a public history space. And she actually recorded her script that she would use when she did these tours, and that has helped in preservation purposes as well. And after she passed away, eventually the property made its way into the college, Grace College and Seminary campus. And for a while, so the downstairs has always been, this is more information probably that you wanted, but the downstairs has always been tour space. And then for a while, the campus turned the upstairs, unfortunately, into married housing space, or just one apartment for married housing. And this was in the 60s. So it went to, the original home is a beautiful mission-style arts and craft bungalow. In the 60s, it had shag carpet and wood paneling and yellow appliances and things. But around the year 2000, all of that was taken out, and there was a full restoration on the home, both the interior and the exterior. The downstairs, because that was always essentially museum space, that was has been pretty much untouched. The upstairs has been restored to its original state. And the other interesting thing I'll say is that my understanding is with a lot of house museums, they're restored and then period pieces are brought back in. With the Sunday home, all of their stuff was either stayed in the home or put in the basement, and all of that could be repurposed. And because we have lots of photographs of the interior and Helen Sunday's description of the house, it could be set up as museum space the way it was. So everything in the house now is actually, was actually owned by the Sundays, including closets full of clothes and cedar chests full of sheets, and their cupboards still have the original glassware and silver utensils and everything in it. So it's an interesting house museum from that regard. Yeah.
Very interesting. Diane.
Forgive the lack of precision of this question.
Oh, sure.
I'm very interested in some of the terminology. I know that Sunday called them campaigns.
Yeah.
How does that relate to revivals? And then how does that relate to the awakenings? A second. How does all that come together in 25 words or less?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think these terms have precise meanings. Revival and awakenings tend to have a little bit more of the meaning of an increased degree of spiritual kind of sensitivity and experience, whether that is someone who comes out or has raised in a Christian religious context, or might even have considered themselves a Christian already. They could be, their spirituality could be revived or awakened. Evangelistic campaigns are more geared towards conversion. Usually, in this American context and in the context of urban centers and cities, there's usually the connotation of someone is living an unchristian life, no matter what their spiritual status would be. And so there's a lot of emphasis on behavior modification that might need to happen when you convert. You stop doing things and then you do more spiritual things after that. But these campaigns could be considered revival campaigns, awakening campaigns. Whitfield's campaigns in the 18th century could be considered evangelistic as well. So the terms are really overlap quite a bit.
That's very helpful.
Yeah.
Tom, are there questions online?
Yes. We have had over 30 people joining us online, and thank you everyone for attending. One person asked, how many women were among New Billy Sunday converts?
That is a great question, and I don't know for sure the answer to that. That it would be good to look up the demographics if that was possible, but perhaps it was pretty evenly divided, and I mean, Billy Sunday is said to have preached to over 100 million people face to face, in the campaigns. So a lot of them would have been women. Yeah.
Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt. With that in mind, someone asked how many are there any audio recordings with all those face-to-face meetings? Were there any audio recordings of his sermons?
Yes. So there's only 2 or 3 extant, and they're all from when he's older. And I would say there's only one recording of him that's like unstaged. That is him actually, as an elderly man in Winona Lake doing a campaign out there. There's a couple of other recordings that are clearly kind of staged, I think. Yeah.
If you could recommend one book to anyone who's interested in Billy Sunday,
Yeah.
what would you suggest?
I think I'd recommend one by Bill Furstenberger. It's called In Rare Form. So it's a good, quick, short read, but also academically sound and well-researched. There's, of course, lots of hagiography about Billy Sunday. Or Lyle Dorset is another one. So, yeah.
Betsy, did you have a question, or Katie?
It's already been asked by someone on.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
I do have a question.
yeah.
So thank you for this.
Mhm.
I'm a little confused about the post office. You're supposed to write down the name of the church and then you follow up.
Yeah.
Were these not new converts, and how did they know what church to write down?
Yeah.
That seemed like a disconnect for me.
Yeah. I think that probably speaks to the fact that they were, a lot of these people that would come down the aisle, the Sawdust Trail, were coming out of Christian cultural contexts, and so might have had a family church that they had been associated with when they were a child. And as we saw from the numbers with Romig's figures, when he's describing very systematically all of the different cards that came by, probably at least half of them were people who were already associated with churches, right? I think there's a psychological element here, and people who have grown up in the evangelical world can really attest to the psychological, I would say,
Get saved over and
unhealthy, the anxiety that this has produced. So people are coming forward just because they're anxious, in a lot of respects. So so it's just kind of a mixed bag of churches that they would have put down. Yeah, Scott.
I was going to ask a question, or I was thinking of a question during the talk, and then Max Hart asked it.
Okay.
I guess I'm just wondering about sort of in the 18th century, the Moravians seemed very suspicious of sort of large gatherings and seemed not to care about numbers. They're very exclusive. And then here in the early 20th century, with some exceptions of the folks you described as sort of the elitists, they seem to welcome the large gatherings and they seem to care about numbers.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts of that sort of change? I mean, obviously there's a lot of time between Whitfield and Sunday, but
Yeah. Just in general, my take on that is just that the Moravians move more towards the evangelical mainstream, and they just seem to look and feel a lot like other American evangelicals who are concerned about these things. Yeah. And I think a lot of that changes then in the 20th century, but in this time period, 19th and early 20th century, I feel like the Moravians have a pretty strong evangelical feel to them.
So you use a lot of print, but they seem to be after the campaigns. Were there a lot of print before the campaigns, like announcing who's, like he said is coming? Were there pamphlets, advertisements?
Within the Moravian Church, or just in general, overall? There would have been, I don't know about specifically pamphlets or other things, but there would have been messages posted in newspapers, in religious journals, and even I think a lot of church-specific publications. So the local churches really was comprised the network. And so they relied a lot on local church leaders disseminating. And I think that's true for the Moravian churches as well. There wasn't a lot of broadsides or pamphlets, but it's clear that they were drumming up support. Those who wanted to support the campaigns were encouraging support through the church publications. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think we'll take your question as the last question. Go ahead.
I'm kind of confused with the Ku Klux Klan
Yeah.
endorsing Sunday.
Yeah.
Did the African Americans feel apprehensive to come, even though they had a separate meeting?
Mm-hmm.
Weren't they nervous about the Ku Klux Klan knowing that they're going to be at that meeting?
Yeah. Well, I think the Klan's activities and endorsements, I don't know how well known that would have been. That it certainly wasn't a significant part of like the media coverage that people would have been aware of. I think probably African Americans knew that there was some KKK endorsement. I don't know how apprehensive they were or not. I'm sure some of them were, but there was at least enough of them who weren't, or who disregarded it to come out and attend those meetings. Now they were smaller. I don't have the figures for the African American meetings, but they would have been smaller. Just to give you, the one thing that comes to mind is I did read in some of Full's sources in the Moravian Church Diary that I think, Billy Sunday had collected like $50,000 in the campaign overall, but then the African American services had collected like $100. So I mean, there's lots of explanations for that, but that gives you a sense that they were certainly much smaller. But there was still enough African Americans interested, and there's a strong evangelical aspect to the African American church tradition in America as well. So going to see a white evangelist certainly would have been a different cultural context, but there was at least some evangelical tradition in black churches to be able to sustain some audiences there. But, yeah.
Was there something in his preaching that encouraged the Ku Klux Klan to support him?
Yeah, he had an Americanist, or we might even call America First kind of political mentality that was very suspicious of immigrants and socialists and unions, and he was more of a fundamentalist in his ideas and theology, and spoke against evolution and other modernist theological ideas. And those are all kinds of things that would have resonated with the KKK. So Sunday was not preaching about race specifically. He was not handling that topic specifically in his in his sermons. But there was enough overlap with the same kind of ideas that the KKK trafficked in. For the KKK was more than just about racial issues. They had a vision of America that was larger, and that overlapped with Billy Sunday's vision of America. And I would say people, even white people like him, even if they weren't endorsing the KKK themselves, their ideas were overlapping, if that makes sense.
Very interesting, and thank
Good.
You so much, Jared,
Mm-hmm.
for sharing your expertise this morning.
Yeah, you bet.
And you will have a chance to ask more questions because we have coffee out and some snacks here, so please stay a little longer. I have one question. I asked this question at our last lecture. We are going to be in charge of a gift shop throughout December, the Star and Candles shop, and it will be on the campus of Central Moravian Church, and it will be our gift shop going there, and we are looking for volunteers to help us in the gift shop. So if you're interested in that and doing a shift here and there, talk to Kelly, and Kelly is in the back, and we will be happy to schedule you. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for watching online. There will be a recording of this lecture available in a week or so. Thank you.